Please join me at the conclusion of this episode for a special question and answer session about this series. Before we begin, a content warning. This episode contains discussion of murder, violence, and trauma. Listener discretion is advised. Alright, so here's where we were. By the time the manhunt ended in June of 1984, all 6 of the Mecklenburg escapees, the Mecklenburg Six, had been caught and put back behind bars. And on paper, that should have been the end of it. The Guinness Book of World Records, largest death row breakout in U.S. history, now over. But around here, that's not how endings work. Because in Smith County, fear doesn't just disappear when the sheriff says the danger's past. It lingers. It settles in the corners of the house like smoke you can't quite air out. People lock their doors a little tighter. Porch lights stayed on. And folks realize something that's hard to forget once it clicks in your mind. Distance doesn't protect you. Because even a prison built to be escape-proof failed once. And once a door like that opens, once the shadow gets out, you don't look at safety the same way again. Before we get into this episode, if you're drawn to true stories from Appalachia, the kind rooted in history, folklore, crime, and things people don't always say out loud, then you're in the right place. This is Roots and Shadows, the real Appalachia. We release new episodes every Saturday, and if you decide to stay, go ahead and press that follow button. That way these stories don't have to come looking for you. Almost as soon as they were back on death row, the real slow part began. Not the chase, not the capture, the waiting. Appeals winding through state court, federal court, year after year after year. And 1 year after the escape, in May of 1985, the U.S. Supreme Court stepped into Lem Tuggle's case and overturned his death sentence. Not because they said he was innocent, but because of procedure. Because of something the system didn't provide. The court cited a ruling that said indigent defendants in capital cases must have access to a psychiatric evaluation. And that mattered, because in the 1984 trial, the prosecution had put psychiatric testimony in front of the jury. Testimony saying Lem would be dangerous if he ever got out. But Lem's defense wasn't given funds to bring their own expert in to challenge it. So the Supreme Court sent it back. Reconsider it. Do it again, they said. And here's the thing, that wasn't the last time. His death sentence would be scrutinized more than once, sent back down the ladder, and every time, the ladder came back up to the same rung. Death reinstated. One article put it blunt as a hammer. Both times the nation's highest court overturned the sentence, and both times the Fourth Circuit Court reaffirmed it, Tuggle should die. The other escapees fought their cases too, but none of them could outrun what was waiting. Virginia, in the 80s and 90s, was not inclined to delay executions. Then Attorney General Jim Gilmore publicly pushed reforms to cut down on what he called years of protracted and often frivolous death row appeals. And the Mecklenburg Six became the examples people pointed at when they said, "See, this is why we need to speed things up." Gilmore pointed specifically to Tuggle, because he murdered again while on parole for a prior killing, and used that as fuel in the argument against parole. And you can feel the roots of that debate, even now. Because when people around here talk about sentencing, they aren't talking about politics. They're talking about protection. The execution dates started falling like dominoes, one after another. And one by one, 5 of the 6 eventually met the end the Commonwealth had already chosen for them. By mid-1996, as Lem's final appeals ran out, the other 5 were already dead. Up first were the Briley brothers, Linwood and James, the most notorious. They led a crime spree through Richmond that claimed at least 11 lives. Their names reached way beyond Virginia, and once they were back in custody, the state wasted no time. Linwood Briley, who was credited as the mastermind of the escape, was executed on October 12, 1984, at 11:01 p.m., just 4 months after he was recaptured. And that night outside the old Virginia State Penitentiary in Richmond, it wasn't quiet. Crowds had gathered, and the mood was set. People in the distance yelling, "Fry him, fry him," fireworks exploding, and others holding candlelight vigils. Inside, Linwood walked toward the chair with his eyes closed, calm. No apology. His reported last words, defiant. "I am innocent." And then the voltage hit, 2 2,500-volt jolts, and he was gone. When the warden announced the time of death, prisoners on death row banged their doors and wailed. And outside, some folks cheered. James Briley followed, April 18, 1985. Before he died, he tried to tie off loose ends in his own way, even married a writer in a prison ceremony 3 weeks before execution. And when the day came, he was calm, almost eerie. Strapped into the same oak chair that killed his brother, James Briley smiled at the witnesses. And right before the switch was thrown, he asked them twice, "Are you happy?" And then he was gone. The Brileys had been the ringleaders of the breakout. Their executions were a message. Escape or no escape, Virginia intends to finish what it starts. After that came the others: Earl Clanton Jr., Derick Peterson, William Leroy Jones. Less headline, same ending. Earl Clanton Jr., executed April 14, 1988. He'd been sentenced to die for strangling his neighbor, the elementary school librarian, during a robbery that netted $8. $8. By the time of his execution, he was 33, wide-eyed, visibly frightened as the officers escorted him into the chamber. An anti-death penalty advocate had counseled him, and she later said his last words to her were, "Help me get through this." At 11:07 p.m., after surging jolts, he was pronounced dead. No big crowd outside, no fireworks, just quiet closure. Derick Peterson, executed August 22, 1991, at 11:13 p.m. for killing a grocery store manager. And this is the one where the system showed its teeth. When they threw the switch during his execution, after the standard second jolt, his heart kept beating. He was still alive. They had to throw the switch again and repeat the cycle. Witnesses described smoke, the smell of burnt flesh. It's the kind of detail you don't forget once you've seen it, because it reminds you even procedure can become a horror. Less than an hour before, the Supreme Court rejected his final appeal. Governor L. Douglas Wilder denied clemency. Peterson died angry. Willie Leroy Jones, executed September 15, 1992. He'd been sentenced to die for horrific double murder of an elderly couple. Shot them, set the wife on fire, stole their life savings, went to Hawaii and spent about $30,000 like it was nothing. At 34, Jones met the chair with the closest thing to grace any of them showed. He kissed the chair. Strapped in at Greensville, he simply said, "I love you." No speech, no protest, just that. And shortly after 11 p.m., he was pronounced dead. By the end of 1992, 5 of the 6 were gone, and still, 1 remained. Lem Tuggle Jr. The last story, the one that took the longest, and maybe left the deepest mark back home. You see, the 1984 escape wasn't the last time Lem tried to outrun the walls. A year later, in 1985, he and 3 other inmates made another attempt. This one didn't involve a van or a fake bomb on a stretcher. It was smaller, desperate. They were caught brandishing a pistol made of cardboard and setting off a homemade bomb built from matchsticks. It wasn't a real weapon, and it wasn't a real explosion, but the intent was real enough. The wanting out never left him. 2 years after that, in 1987, Tuggle tried again, this time with one other inmate. They cut through metal screens and hid their work with shoe polish, hoping no one would notice that they were slowly being opened. Someone did. The attempt failed before it ever got close to daylight, and every failed attempt only tightened the certainty inside the system that Lem Tuggle was never meant to walk free again. So with the other 5 Mecklenburg Six already executed, that left Lem, the last living member of the escape gang, the only one who managed to keep the state at bay beyond the early 90s. And his case, over time, became a place where bigger arguments piled up. Justice, mercy, public safety, and how long a system should be allowed to grind before it finishes what it promised. He had already cheated death once with that 1985 Supreme Court ruling. Virginia resentenced him to death, but Lem kept appealing again and again and again, and his legal fight picked up a heavyweight in 1989. A young Richmond attorney working pro bono, a name you wouldn't expect to be tangled up in a Smith County murder case. Not yet anyways. At the time, he was just a lawyer arguing something simple. Even the condemned deserved competent counsel. He argued Lem's 1984 trial was a bizarre aberration. He argued that protections allowed in minor civil cases weren't offered to Lem because he was unpopular. He argued the evidence of the assault should have been challenged harder because without it, the murder wouldn't meet Virginia's capital threshold. He argued the jury could have been biased. He argued the defense should have had its own psychologist to refute the state's future dangerousness claim. And in 1984, something happened that shook the system. A federal judge, U.S. District Judge James Turk, overturned Lem's capital murder conviction, ordered that Lem be given a new trial or be released from prison within 6 months. For a moment, it looked like Lem might escape execution through the courts. But Virginia fought back hard. The Attorney General's office appealed. They weren't going to let the last of the Mecklenburg Six just slip away. The case ping-ponged, and in the summer of 1995, the Fourth Circuit reinstated the death sentence once again. Lem's hope evaporated, and his execution dates returned. Lem had had 4 separate execution dates set over the years. 3 times he won last-minute stays. And by the mid-90s, even the people back home were exhausted by the on-again, off-again. As Marion, Virginia's mayor, the county seat of Smith County, said in December of 1996, "I haven't heard anyone talking about it." A barber on Main Street said it simple. Everybody's in favor of it, though. It's just taken so long that people are tired of talking about it. And Lem himself? He sounded numb. He said, "I've been on the road for 13 years. You face death every day and you finally just get immune to it." He claimed he kept filing appeals mostly because of a female friend urging him to. Inside, Lem changed in ways that complicated the whole story. He was raised Baptist. On death row, Tuggle converted to Catholicism. He was drawn to the theology, to the priest who visited him, and to the structure of a faith that offered something solid to hold on to. When a man is drowning, he'll grab whatever rope is lowered to him. Father James Griffin became his spiritual advisor for 13 years, and Father Griffin said something that still makes people argue. "I just know Tuggle is dying a man of God. I wouldn't have said that 13 years ago." But redemption isn't simple, because Lem still refused to fully admit what he had done wrong. He had asked for forgiveness, and then denied responsibility. He blamed an unknown person for the first killing, and said the gun accidentally fired during a struggle on the second one. A reporter summed it up. He wants forgiveness for his crimes, but won't admit to them. To the end, Lem kept saying, if he hadn't been drinking, it never would have happened. That didn't comfort the families. It just sounded like another way to sidestep the truth. Finally, December 12, 1996. No more reprieves. Governor George Allen refused clemency. The Supreme Court declined to hear Lem's final petition a week earlier. This time, there would be no stay. That evening at Greensville Correctional Center in Jarrett, Virginia, the room was almost routine. Lem was 44. Calm. Virginia had shifted to lethal injection as the primary method of execution. The electric chair was still an option, but only if the condemned requested it. Lem did not. So a gurney awaited him, and in a moment that still feels strange to imagine, he lay down on that gurney himself. They strapped him in, At 9:03 p.m., needles were inserted into both arms. IV line set. Then the warden asked Lem if he had any final words, and he said, "Merry Christmas." 2 words, holiday words, spoken in a death chamber. Some people heard humor. Some heard defiance. Some heard a man who had simply run out of ways to be human. Then the drugs flowed, and at 9:08 his breathing became heavy, then shallow, and at 9:12 p.m., Lem Davis Tuggle Jr. was pronounced dead. Lem's remains didn't stay in Virginia. He had arranged to be cremated, and his ashes were flown to England to be scattered in a wooded area. He said he couldn't stand the thought of being buried in a box because of claustrophobia. So the man whose shadows stretch across Smith County left his home soil behind. Back home, it wasn't a party. It was a quiet sigh, the kind you release when something heavy finally stops hanging over you. People weren't out in the streets cheering. There were no fireworks. People said they don't hear a great deal about it. I guess folks were just glad it's finally getting done. The victims' families didn't speak with joy. They spoke with exhaustion. Anna's sister said, "We just want to put it to rest." And Ruth's family was careful, because last-minute disappointments had already happened before. One of her sons didn't even change his work schedule for the final date, because he had been through this before, just to watch it get called off. By the time it was finally done, one of Ruth's sons had passed away, never seeing the end, never seeing the justice. That's the quiet damage of a process that drags on for decades. While working on this episode, I had the privilege to speak with Smith County's current Commonwealth's attorney, Philip Bucky Blevins, and the irony of it is hard to ignore. Bucky is a veteran, a member of the American Legion, the very same place where those dances were held back in 1971 and 1983. The dances where 2 women crossed paths with a shadow they didn't recognize until it was too late. He told me this case weighs on him, both personally and professionally. He said, "As a veteran and a member of the American Legion, there isn't a single meeting where my thoughts don't return to those 2 women murdered by Lem Tuggle." He said their names are a constant reminder of what's at stake when the system fails. And then he said something that sounds like old Appalachian wisdom, but it isn't. It's a warning. He said, "We're told that lightning doesn't strike twice in the same place. In this case, it did." He said, and the reason is clear. He told me he spends a great deal of time studying Smith County's homicide cases, even the ones that remain unresolved. He refuses to call them unsolved, because unsolved is too clean, too final, too easy to walk away from. He said those cases deserve honesty, persistence, and a prosecutor who hasn't forgotten. He said history teaches us if we're willing to learn, and the lesson from the Tuggle case is blunt. Parole and early release failed. Truth in sentencing matters. When a court imposes a sentence, the public and the victim's family should be able to rely on it, meaning what it says. Bucky told me his job, just like it was of his predecessors who prosecuted this case, is to protect the people of Smith County, and that responsibility was stripped away when Lem was released early. He said in 1984, the prosecutor put the proverbial needle in Tuggle's arm by ensuring he could never harm anyone again. But that certainty came only after Ruth Parker paid the ultimate price. And Bucky said it plain. Ruth should have lived out her life peacefully. Anna should not be a memory we revisit with regret. If we're serious about public safety, sentences must be real, he said. Parole must be rare and justified. And the system must stop gambling with innocent lives. He said, truth in sentencing is not about punishment. It is about protection. And here's the thing. When you listen to stories like this, you think the roots are only here in Smith County. But the roots of this case ran all the way through Virginia, wrapping and intertwined, through the courts, into politics, and into history. Because that young attorney who fought so hard for Lem Tuggle back then, his name was Timothy Kane. Yes, the same Tim Kane who would later become governor of Virginia and who now serves as a United States Senator. That's the interesting thing about history. You don't always know what you're watching take shape until years later. But before we depart from this story, remember this. Even in a place built for the worst endings, there were moments where the darkness paused. Do you remember the 2 death row inmates who stopped the violent attacks on the guards during the escape? Their names were Wilbert Lee Evans and Willie Turner. Wilbert, he stepped in when the staff were about to be harmed. Just for a moment, he drew a line. It didn't change where his road ended. He too was executed. And Willie Turner, the one who stopped the killing of the guards when it could have spiraled out of control. Guards' lives were saved, no doubt, because of him. He stayed behind, thinking, trusting the courts might save him from death, maybe show him some mercy for his good deeds during the escape. They didn't. In 1995, Turner was executed. But something interesting. After his death, they found a loaded homemade gun hidden inside a typewriter in his cell. And the note was just one word: smile. That's the thing about these mountains, and anybody who's lived here knows it. One right thing doesn't buy you a clean slate. The past has a long memory, and it knows the way home. These 2 men may have slowed the dark just enough for others to live, but neither of them outran what followed. So what do we do with all this? A prison built to hold the worst men in the state failed. A parole system meant to weigh risk failed. Justice carried out decades later, but only after the innocent paid the price. 2 inmates did something honorable in the middle of chaos, and they still died. An execution meant to be final failed once, and a small Appalachia county had to live through it all, quietly, for years. Because that's what we do here. We keep going. We keep living. But we don't forget. Justice came home in 1996, but it didn't erase the shadows, because in Appalachia, people understand something that no report or court ruling can change. There's always another shadow lurking, even when you can't see it yet. It has been Roots and Shadows, the real Appalachia, where every root tells a story and every shadow hides one. As a reminder, these stories are drawn from public records, historical reporting, and conversations passed down through families, neighbors, and memory. Some names have been changed, and where the written record goes quiet, details have been carefully dramatized for storytelling. Okay, and welcome to the post-podcast question and answer session. I received a lot of requests and questions from you listeners during the making of this podcast. After each episode, I would see people out in the community, or I'd get text messages or messages about some questions. I thought this, or what happened to that? And so I thought I would take some time to answer some of those questions that was sent in by you listeners. And hopefully this will answer a lot of questions for a lot of you all. And we'll get started with this. I'm going to have a special guest join me here in a moment. It's going to be my wife, Melanie Austin. She's going to be one asking me these questions, and we're going to see what we can come up with. All right, Melanie, welcome to the post-podcast question and answer session. I appreciate you taking the time this evening to help me get these questions out there. So I understand you've got some questions for me from some of our listeners out there.
Yes, we do. We have a few questions here, and thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
All righty. So, let's go ahead and get started, and we'll see if we can't get some of these questions going.
Okay. The first question I have is, what is was your relationship to Lem Tuggle Jr.?
Okay, yeah, that's one that I get asked a lot. And Lem would be my first cousin once removed. And to be honest with you, I didn't understand that terminology till I started researching some genealogy things. So Lem and my mother were first cousins. So Lem's father and my mother's father were brothers. So that's where that once removed. I always assumed we were second cousins, but that's not how that plays out. So my grandfather on my mother's side and Lem's father were brothers. So that was how we were related.
Okay. All right. Very good. So the second question that we have is, why did you change the name of the victims?
Yeah, I struggled with that, and I just felt like I needed to. I just felt like that they had been through enough already, and actually bringing their names up. I just felt like that they deserved some peace and respect. So I chose not to do that.
Okay, very good. The next question is, why didn't you include more details about the murders themselves?
Yeah, I didn't really want this to turn into a really dark a series. I mean, obviously there were some details I left out when I was reading some of the files and some of the reports. There was these murders were, could be considered gruesome, and there were some things that I just felt like, I just didn't want it to go too dark. That was the main reason that I did that.
Okay, perfect. Okay, the next question we have is everybody's been really interested in this podcast, and they want to know more, maybe details about Lem growing up, about, how old he was when he committed the first murder, and then also if he was married and things of that nature. Do you know much about his past or his early life?
Well, I don't. I mean, I do know he was 19 when he committed the first murder. I know just from what, unfortunately, most of the people that could tell me this information in my family are no longer here. They've all passed away. But I do remember, as we talked about this, years ago, that I would ask my mom and my aunts, who knew him, like, were they around him much? And they weren't around him a whole lot, but they did tell me that he, he just always was kind of off to himself when he was around them, that, he just was kind of standoffish, and they themselves wasn't around him a whole lot. As far as who's married, I'm not aware of any of that. I don't have a whole lot of details about what his childhood was like. Unfortunately, I don't.
The next question we have on the list is, what happened at the prison after they escaped? Do you know much about that at Mecklenburg itself?
Yeah. Ironically, I was friends with the assistant warden that was sent in there to kind of clean it up. And I talked to him about it many, many years ago, before this was everything. And a lot of rules were already in place to prevent this. Just a lot of things, they kind of got lax on things. But after the fact, they come in. I know he told me he went there and he was basically going to fire everybody in the prison. And they told him, well, you can't fire everybody. And he said, well, look, it was something to the fact that you just had 6 death row inmates walk out of this prison.
Yeah.
Something failed. It's the people. There was a lot of failures. So he says, we got some problems here. So I think they pretty much gave him free rein and kind of just let him get it whipped back up into shape. And later on, death row did move from Mecklenburg. They moved it out of there, but and when the inmates did come back, they kind of spread them back out. I mean, they were all in different prisons during this time frame. But yeah, I know that there was a big investigation done after the fact, and a lot of controls were. I think there was a report somewhere that there were a lot of internal failures that contributed to the escape.
Mm-hmm. Well, that kind of leads to the next question that we have. Exactly how did the prisoners overpower the guards?
Well, they planned this months and months before they actually went through with it. And they started watching the guards and the moves. They learned their moves. They learned what they did. They learned that they were watching, like, how they locked this door, or what they did that. So, and they were studying them themselves. So they were kind of running surveillance on the guards for months. And then they were just kind of being really nice and, befriending them, sort of, trying to get close to them, hoping that the guards would get complacent, really, kind of let their guard down. No pun intended there, but.
Yeah.
But, that's kind of how that went. So when the actual escape started, one of the, I think they maybe all went out for rec or something. I don't remember exactly. But one of the inmates stayed back, hid back. Mm. And
so he hid.
Yeah. And so when he saw there was a control room, and the control room pretty much controls, like, all the locks, and they can open doors and, let people in and out. I mean, you get access to that, and then you can open doors and things, and that was their plan, get access to the control room. So they waited for that moment. He saw the door open up for the guard. I don't know if the guard came in or come out, whatever, but he overpowered the guard, went in there and just started smashing buttons, opening all the cells, which allowed a lot more of the inmates out. And then
chaos ensued.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when the other guards started coming in to help, well, they were just bum rushed by a flood of people. So that's kind of what started it, and from that point. So that would be that one.
Okay. Let's see. The next question we have now. This was, I thought, pretty interesting in the podcast when the first two were arrested or found the next day, that they were in a laundromat and they were drinking wine and eating cheese. That just seemed a little different. Do you have any more details on that part? Maybe where they got that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there was another question that somebody asked about where they get the initial money, because we can kind of put these together. So you got to remember, so they overpowered the guards. They stripped the guards of their uniform. Well, what's in the pockets of the guards? There's probably some, I don't know what the rule is if they can have certain things, but apparently there was some concern later on in one of the reports about them using the guards' credit cards, and I don't know if this was in the van, but somewhere they got access to some cash. I would imagine this day and time, you go into prison that you can't even take your wallet with you. I don't think you can probably take anything. But maybe back then, maybe that was part of some of the failures. Anyways, so that's where they got the money. There was a convenience store right beside this laundromat. So they had went into the convenience store and bought cheap wine and cheap. No, I mean, that's what they wanted. I
guess they didn't get that in the prison.
No wine and cheese, and maybe cheese, but government cheese in the prison, but yeah. No wine. Well, maybe. Well, it probably could be smuggled in the contraband. But so that's how that happened. And then somebody asked one of those inmates later, like, why did you allow yourself to get captured so quickly? Why did you just
because they're just sitting there in the laundromat.
You really just said
and that would stand out, too, drinking wine and eting cheese.
Yeah.
Not just the patch, the missing patch.
And his response was something to the effect like, I really don't know. I was just stupid. So
okay. All right. Well, I think the last question I have here is, did you find out anything that you didn't already know when you were researching all of this?
Oh my, tons of things. And there was so much that I had to decide like what to include, what's important, and I want to tell the story as it was. And there's a lot of these things that I really wished I could have put in there, but it just maybe not have flowed right but yes, there was a lot of things, a lot of minor details that you would only learn by specifically reading case files, from reading, old newspaper articles, things of that nature. Fortunately, this being a high-profile escape, this being a national news event, there was a lot of articles preserved. New York Times, New York Post, Washington Post, Richmond Times Dispatch. The local newspapers seemed to be some problems with some locating
trying
some of
to
that.
Get those,
I think they may have lost some of those. Something I'm not sure. So, but there was some Roanoke Times. There were some things in there. These are papers that really, a lot of articles still out there existed. So I was able to do that. But I learned a lot of details reading all that.
Anything specific?
Yeah. So some interesting things. Earl Clanton Jr. He was one of the ones that escaped death row. He became friends with the star who played Dennis the Menace.
Really?
Yes. He was played by Jay North. So I don't know how, but ironically, later on in life, Jay himself became a correctional officer. So in Florida. So that was interesting.
Well.
Also, some interesting things. Lem Tuggle tried to get in the 91 during the Gulf War. He wanted to.
Did he want to enlist?
Yeah, he tried to get the state to allow. His theory was that we have nothing to lose. Put us on the front lines.
Okay.
Well, let us go to the Gulf War and fight. Of course, the state's response was, "Well, we really want to give people on death row, convicted murderers, weapons." So,
No.
So that was something that was interesting. He wanted to volunteer, him and a bunch of others. Let's see. There was something other interesting. The executioner.
Mm-hmm.
The man who pressed the button from 1982 to 1999. He was the one who would flip the switch, if you would, during the electrocutions, and he was the one who would push the plunger for the lethal injections. So that was his job. I mean,
Wow.
But
That's a heavy job.
Yeah. And he said that, later on, he went to prison himself. He was gotten messed up in some kind of money laundering scheme with some drugs. I'm not sure, but he did say that after he retired and got out of it, he did change his opinion of the death penalty because of seeing all them doing that. But he did say that he preferred the electrocution over the lethal injection, which I thought was interesting because he says you feel more attached with the lethal injection. He said during an execution, he says it's basically you're just pushing a button and the machine runs for 45 seconds. And you push it again for another 45 seconds. But he said during the lethal injection, you're on the end actually just pushing a syringe into a line, basically into the IV, and you're watching the chemicals go down the line into the condemned veins. So he didn't like that as much. He said it felt more connected. So, that's some of the things that we learned.
Okay, and on that same note, I noticed in this last podcast when you were talking about the times of the executions, it seemed like it was always later. Well, it was always later in the night when, sometime in the PM, 9, 10, whatever time. So do you know why this may be the case in your research, why it was done later at night?
I don't know, but I know the theories out there is that people use less electricity at night and they have more electricity to put into the condemned. And now that could be true. Maybe that originated from some long time ago when electricity was a little more scarce. But I don't know that. But you're right; they were all usually at night. And I do remember the few times that I remember that Lem was going to get electrocuted before the lethal injection even became an option. That people around here would make comments like, "Well, make sure you turn your porch light off tonight," insinuating that
saving electricity.
Yeah, so we can have more electricity to send up there. So, that's just kind of how things were. But I don't know, and that's a very good question. Maybe somebody might know the answer to that and share it with us.
Okay. Yeah, we'd like to hear from you if you do. Okay, the final question that I have, I know you've put a lot into these last 4 weeks with these podcasts, and a question I have is, how many hours do you think that it has taken you to do all the research and then to record the episodes and complete them all? How long do you think it's been?
Wow. I probably don't want to count that up, really. But it's been a lot. And the first episode, it took me longer because I was just, I was learning some things as I went. The research took a long time. But the writing is what takes. I know that some people ask me to make them longer. That's why the first two were shorter. But I'm like, do you know how many hours I've got in that 12-minute episode? So I don't know. I'm going to say 60 to 70 hours probably in this 4-part series, maybe more.
That's incredible.
It is. So it's very taxing, and but I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed doing it and doing the research. But, and you know that I've been missing a lot during this time frame. So.
You have. Well, thank you for the answer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I guess that's going to wrap up the question and answer session. I do appreciate everyone that listened to this 4-part series of the Lem Tuggle murders, and it was enjoyment for me to do it, and I hope you enjoyed listening. And as we move on to the next episode, won't be true crime. I'll go ahead and give you a spoiler alert. This next one is not true crime. It's not going to be a series. It's just going to be one episode. I hope you enjoy it.